Ecosystem Exchange is the podcast series by T6 Ecosystems that explore different themes shaping our world. Each season spotlights a new focus, bringing together experts for engaging discussions. Through this exchange of ideas, we promote a sense of intellectual exploration, interdisciplinary collaboration, and actionable insights.
Welcome to Ecosystem Exchange, a podcast by T6 Ecosystems, where we explore the intersection of research, innovation, and real life. This episode is part of the series, The Power of Art, Science, and Technology, a European Perspective. I'm Katja Firus, partner and head of the Sustainability Department at T6 Ecosystems, and I'm also leading the T6 communication team. Today, I have the pleasure to have here with me Nora Mayr. We invited Nora because we collaborated with her on a special arts and science initiative where she acted as a curator. This initiative was part of the European project called CircEUlar, in which T6 is a consortium member. Nora is a freelance curator, lecturer at the Node Center for Curatorial Studies, and since 2022, part of the Angewandte Interdisciplinary Lab at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. In our Ecosystem Exchange podcast, we look at how research shapes the way we live, work, and interact with our planet, how it drives transformative solutions, and how it can translate into real-world impact by moving from ideas to action. I would like to discuss this with you, Nora, in this episode, and reflect about the role that arts and the collaboration between scientists and artists can have in order to present complex scientific work to a broader audience. We do this by looking at climate change-related research, and in particular by looking at the European-funded project CircEUlar, which I will present in a minute, and the collaboration of CircEUlar with the KlimaBiennale 2024 in Vienna through the Sensing Resonance Initiative. From there, we will discuss about the general experiences of arts and science from a curator's viewpoint. Welcome, Nora, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thanks. Hello, Katja. Thanks for the invitation as well. I'm super happy to be here and very curious about our upcoming conversation as well.
Me too, I can tell you. So I'm really looking forward to that. So Nora, could you tell us about yourself and your work a little bit before we start diving into the Sensing Resonance Initiative in which we collaborated?
Yes, sure. I'm happy to introduce myself. So in general, as you already mentioned, I'm a freelance curator. This means that I'm realizing all sorts of projects, could be exhibition projects, but also art projects in public space, or like I did with Sensing Resonance, and project that involves a combination of art and science. Even though the projects I realize can vary in terms of their content. So for example, I was looking at topics like solidarity or care, but also wicked futures we face in projects I did already in the past. I would say like the common thread in my practice is the interest in creating situations of exchange and communication. I'm in that sense not that interested in producing classical exhibitions, meaning like setups where audiences enter a space and are simply in awe of the artwork. But I'm more interested in creating scenographies, atmospheres, situations maybe, that create playful interactions and really involve the audience and maybe also engage them in discourse and encourage them to kind of get in contact with the project itself. So academically, maybe also shortly, I actually studied communication science, and I believe that this interest is still a core element of my curatorial work, as I just described. So I'm curious about art and art projects as possibility to engage with one another. I think that's basically at the core of what my interest is.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Nora. And I think we are already deeply in the topic that we would like to discuss and also about impact that your work can have. So before we talk about the Sensing Resonance Initiative, I would like to briefly introduce the CircEUlar project in which this initiative took place. CircEUlar is a European research and innovation action coordinated by the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. The project develops circular pathways for a EU low carbon transition. What does this mean? It looks, among others, at dematerialization and lifetime extension of material stocks, as well as recycling potentials. And all this with the aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As this brief introduction shows, CircEUlar is a highly scientific project which is combining new data and modeling. In order to be comprehensive and to create an impact that goes beyond numbers and scientific papers, T6 has the role of engaging stakeholders, developing policy recommendations, and coordinating the communication and dissemination of project activities and its results. So, for communicating results to a broader public, CircEUlar planned from the start a collaboration with the KlimaBiennale 2024, which is a unique ever climate-focused art festival, which is both aiming at a paradigm shift towards a livable and sustainable future. The idea of this collaboration came mainly from two CircEUlar project partners that are based in or nearby Vienna, the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences and the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. The first contact with the KlimaBiennale organizers, the idea of sensing resonance was born. Nora, so I would like to ask you to introduce the initiative that we did with the KlimaBiennale and introduce also the KlimaBiennale itself.
Yeah, so when I got invited by the KlimaBiennale to basically accompany an art and science project, there were quite a few things still open on the conceptual side, which I thought was really intriguing from the beginning. So the KlimaBiennale, which is basically like every 2 years happening a cultural event, looking in a broader context at climate change, climate discourse, climate crisis, including artistic work, but also looking a lot, and this is maybe a kind of overbroad from my perspective on the KlimaBiennale, like looking on a broader context on this topic, also through the lens of what it means for society, on political levels. So they really tried to make the topic in a broader sense, opening up in a broader sense. And one part of this kind of looking at the topic was looking at art and science as well, or scientific research, of course, as well. And that's when I got invited. So it was clear when I got invited that there should be some artistic responses to existing research from the CircEUlar project, but it was pretty open in terms of what those responses would look like and what form they would take. And I personally was immediately intrigued by this openness of the project, because very often in the art world, we are focused on production and outcomes. That might be a similarity to science as well. So the end goal for us in the art world would be a show or a finished art piece. But in this case, the interaction between the artist and the scientist was actually meant to be at the center. And yes, the artist should respond in their language, so in artistic ways, but they didn't necessarily need to produce finalized works, but they could really also just share sketches or loose thoughts. And it was clear from the beginning that we wanted to actually focus on these conversations we would have. That's also why I came up with the title Sensing Resonance, because this sense of a possible reaction, this feeling out process by the artists in response to the research was meant to be actually at the heart of the project. And that's why I decided to name it that way.
And perhaps you can reflect a little bit more about the role you had in this, but also I'm very curious to learn on how you then selected the artists. I mean, how did you make the choice? Do you have a pool of artists you choose from, or are you, or did you look for them specifically based on the research input that you received? So yeah, perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, with this particular project, I always describe my role as the sort of matchmaker. So I basically got this list from CircEUlar research projects, and then was thinking about which artist would be a perfect match. And this meant, of course, researching as well. I mean, I knew, like looking through the material, I had some artists in mind, but for other projects, I was not quite sure, or I was looking actually for possible connection points where I could see that artists would be able to actually connect somehow. And this could mean either connect via the content the research project was addressing. It could also be via the method they are using. Yeah, so we had one project using quality interviews where I had the feeling, okay, this could be interesting for artists who are also working with the format of interviews or dialogue in a way. But for example, maybe one example that makes it a bit more understandable how it worked is that I knew, for example, I wanted to work with a research project mapping building stocks across Europe, just because it's, to me as an outsider, insane. Yes, it's basically this kind of collected data set of more than 200 million buildings in 30 countries in Europe. And to me, this sounded like, yeah, manic. And I was really impressed by that. And I wanted to include this research project. But I also knew that I needed to find an artist who wouldn't be intimidated by that amount of data. And even more, I wanted to find someone who would actually be excited about working with this data set. So that's when I started to research for artists who are working a lot with data or with the manipulation of data. And I came across Julian Palach, and Julian had been working already for years with actually changing and manipulating data sets in playful, but sometimes also poetic ways. And that's when I thought, okay, he could be actually a great match. And it turned then out in the end that he really was. And on the other hand side, for example, just maybe a second example, I also invited or worked with the artist Imaina Tsaseres, who is actually interested in, like in her practice, she's using food as a material also, but she's also, and that was something I was specifically interested, focusing on different forms of knowledge production. So Imaina is an artist whose work evolves through extensive research in collaboration with also non-human beings and local ecosystems, and in response to kind of spiritual political concerns, she calls it. And I paired her then with scientists Lisa Kaufmann and Helmut Haberl from BOKU, who have been doing research on the topics of, like amongst others, of course, but in this case, research papers had been produced on the topic of biodiversity footprint of urban consumption. And as part of Sensing Resonance, what happened is that Imaina basically developed a sort of cookbook, suggesting recipes that would actually help also eating less meat and all the things that would be necessary. But she also gave a performative lecture that included reflections drawn from indigenous knowledge, actually. And this was a kind of content-wise add-on to the existing research perspective that had been given. And I think this was a very nice, yeah, addition probably to the research that had happened.
From what I saw from the artworks, I completely agree on what you described. All the artistic, let's say, expressions that were made by the artists are very particular and very interesting. And if our listeners are interested to explore the artworks in more detail, then you can have a look at the description below of this episode where you can find the link. I would like to come back a little bit on this collaboration aspect now between the scientists and the artists. So how did the collaboration concretely happen once you selected the artists and the scientists of CircEUlar were selected and the teams, let's say, were created? So what happened then? What was the process?
Yeah, so as basically, as already mentioned, a big part of the project was essentially facilitating the connection exchange between the artists and the scientists. So what I did was very basic. We arranged several meetings, either online or in real life, depending on the possibilities, where actually the pair of scientists with the individual artists would meet. And depending on the projects, we met only once or twice. But in some cases, we had also really I don't know, 5 or 6 meetings, which were much longer. And what we also did additionally to this kind of individual group meetings, I also invited, and this is a very private gesture maybe to do, but I think it had an impact as well for the project. I made it like a dinner at my home. Yeah, so I invited all the artists and the scientists who were able to come, and some even came from Munich to come to my house and meet. And this was really a very nice evening, and we weren't particularly talking about the individual project so much, but it was really more about this coming together, sitting together, also feeling out where we are standing in life, maybe on some points, and also, of course, then discussing questions we had over the all research topics, or also, difficulties maybe that turned up. So maybe also as one example, for one project with the artist Boriana Venceslavova and the scientists Henrik Rau and Owen Geralis from Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, we met, for example, several times. Like, this was the most meeting intense, I would say, project we had. And Henrik and Owen, maybe just to explain, were working on the research project Circular Consumption Practice. So they looked into the question why people actually struggle to implement circular consumption practices in their daily life. So I was really fascinated in this kind of psychological element they were looking at in the research. And I thought then that Boriana could be a great fit. And maybe to contextualize a little bit Boriana's work, she is in her work, she's doing film, photography, and she's usually looking at stereotypical roles, but also models of representation, as well as effects of political and social structures on our existence. Yeah, so exactly also this kind of psychological effects are super interesting for her usually. And I thought that her perspective to the research could be really interesting. And in the end, it really was. Yeah, and as part of the research project itself, kind of interviews had happened. So Owen and Henrike in several European countries had been doing quality interviews around the psychology and why people are not doing different practices or why they are. And we had with Boriana a lot of discussions on, first of all, which countries had been chosen and how would people answer there. And what then the outcome was of the whole conversation is that Boriana ended up looking at, I would say, a different demographic or a different group of people, which was actually the wealthiest segment of population. Yeah? Because we had a lot of discussions around this. Okay, we're looking on what we as kind of the normal people are doing, but what is actually with the richest people who are, and we know this for a fact, also who are producing a lot of CO2 emissions, etc. And she actually produced a video work, Now It's Sun in the Rich Man's World, she called it, which puts kind of utopian words into the mouths of 2 of the richest men in the world, Elon Musk and Bernard Arnault, and let them voice their supposed practices in circular economy. So it's a kind of utopian future talk they're doing. Which turned out, I think, very funny, also sad in a way, but yeah.
I agree with you, and just to mention, it was done before Elon Musk became politically that active and prominent. So it was way before the elections in the United States.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you. The discussion and the process itself was very important, and it was somehow the heart of this collaboration. However, we had an endpoint. Let's say we had an event. We had an event at the KlimaBiennale, and perhaps you can say a little bit about this event and how the artworks were presented or what happened at this event. So just to round up this part of Sensing Resonance.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I said everything was open and there was no goal to it. It was not completely true like that, but because yes, indeed, there was a kind of final outcome or a situation, which was actually that we knew that the Wiener Klimagipfel, so the Vienna Climate Summit would happen. And this was actually a 2-day interactive event, almost like a symposium, I would say, that was organized by the KlimaBiennale, and that was looking or aimed at schools and the extracurricular education community, basically, yeah, and researchers as well, and scientists. And throughout the 2 days, there were actually good practice examples shared. We had workshops. There were scientific, practical, or artistic contributions shared. And as part of this 2-day event, sensing resonance was also presented. And we had actually a whole half of the day was dedicated to sensing resonance, where we had the possibility to actually present each of the individual couples, I would call them. So we had 4 couples, 4 projects, where, and I think this was really nice, we had sort of moderated conversations. So I was moderating it, and then we had the artists and the scientists there as well. And maybe rediscussing or giving some insights on how the conversations happened, or giving the audience some sense of the conversations we had, and also explain the projects. And then parallelly to it, it was also the day where we actually presented the video works that had been produced, or had like the food recipes of Imina, for example, had been presented there. So this 2 days event was actually the possibility to see the project also for the wider audience, I would say.
What I think is perhaps interesting is that in the CircEUlar project, which is a project funded by the European Union, is that we allocated, of course, a budget for this initiative. So it was the Sensing Resonate initiative had a budget that we could use, of course, to pay this collaboration, and especially the work of the artists, but also your work, Nora. And so it's nothing that is done for free. Exactly. And I think this is also important to mention that it is something that we planned from the very beginning, also from this point of view.
No, definitely. It's basically also just that it's basically an add-on budget to produce a show out of it. But I think exactly. And I mean, I think it's great that, for example, the artworks are shown in context of CircEUlar presentations and projects, and kind of part of this. Yeah,
I just would like to mention to the listeners that we produced video interviews. We did video interviews with most of the artists, with you, Nora, as a curator, with the organizer of the KlimaBiennale, and also with all the researchers and scientists who were involved. And we invite you to listen to these interviews, because they are diving much deeper into this collaborative aspect, and also the, let's say, the reflection that the artists did on the basis of the scientific input that they received, and also how the whole process was received by the scientists, which is also very interesting. So we invite you to listen to these video interviews. You find them on the CircEUlar YouTube channel, and you'll find the address again in the episode description below. Now I would like to move a little bit to a more general reflection and away from this specific initiative. So from your point of view, Nora, what is the particularity of these type of collaborations where both the scientists and the artists invest time, and money is, of course, invested, and so on? So we are using public funds. You already reflected a little bit about it, but perhaps you can say something more also from other work that you are curating and doing. So I'm curious to hear about that.
I mean, I think the particularity really lies in stepping out of one's own context. So as well for the art as well as for the science, basically. So for me, a successful art and science project is one where content is transformed, maybe, but also ideally something new is created in the process. New in the sense of that maybe on a scientific part, new questions come up, or perspectives, and on the artistic part, new material pops up and reactions to basically these materials, which would be the research things. So I was also, when you asked me now this question, I was thinking of the project I did with Barbara Kapusta, also in part of the Sensing Resonance. She worked on the title on a project called Narratives for Circular Economy-Driven Net Zero Emission Pathways. And what she basically did, she came up with short video animations of amorphous creatures that express a sense of unease, I would say, urging viewers to pause for a moment. So it was a very emotional video, I would say. And what I thought was interesting that her animation, they were actually not directly related to the content of the research project, I would say. So I think they were maybe the farthest away, but she rather focused on an emotional layer around the goal of reaching net zero emission. So what I really appreciated about Barbara's animations was that it channeled a feeling that I think many of people attending the summit, but probably most of us, share when it comes to this kind of topic of climate crisis. So a feeling of overwhelm or also sadness. And for me, Barbara gave that feeling in combination with the invitation to pause and slow down, even in our consumption habits, an emotional outlet and a visible platform, which of course the research project as such could not do, because it's not emotional and it's not catering to our subconscious fears, I would say, or even conscious open fears. So I believe that collaborations between artists and scientists are maybe a bit like a ripple effect in water. So it's like a raindrop falling and then the ripples spread outward. And we don't really know how far they'll reach or who they will touch, but they move something. And this I really believe strongly. Or maybe to say in other words, at my core, I believe that it's always valuable to step outside of one's own headspace, even if it's just for a moment. So for scientists, it might mean talking about research in a new way, or being asked, as I said already, different questions in the interaction with artists. Whereas for the artist, it can be inspiring to be engaging in this kind of unfamiliar materials. So it's really, for all parties, about shifting perspectives in the end and having new experiences. Yeah.
Thank you for this. And very much related to this is a next question that I have to you. It's a question that I'm asking myself also all the time, because communicating about climate research topics to a wider audience, always the question that I ask to myself is, whom can we reach? Whom do we reach? Do we reach with our activities the people that are already, let's say, not convinced, but that already know about the fact that climate change is an important topic and that climate action is needed, and that are also trying to live a more sustainable lifestyle. So what do you think, with your long experience in art and science collaborations, also in other fields, I mean, not only in climate related topics, but you said also that you worked about social issues and so on. Do you think that with these kind of collaborations that we can reach a wider audience by communicating science through art? And which type of audience do you think that we can reach?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit a tricky question, because I think art and science face maybe similar problems also on certain levels here. I mean, they are both, I think, quite elitist, or perceived very often as elitist, maybe sections. So, I mean, I think what happens if we have an art and science collaboration is we tap into two different, let's say, groups of audiences. The art bubble has its own audiences, and the scientific world has their own. So this is already a combination. But then I think in the next step, it would also be important to actually, or that's also what we are dealing with in the art world right now, is this question of how can we create also outreach projects? How can we involve various or even more audiences? And I think that's something the art world is maybe dealing with already since a longer time than the scientific world, just because it's part of our job and our motivation that we want to be accessible for a lot of different audiences, let's say kids, elderly people, whatever, different groups. So in that sense, I think, yes, we bring in, or we as the art world, we bring in new audiences, but I think we should together look at ways to actually open the space even more.
Yeah, this brings me a little bit to looking at the future, at next steps. As I said before, CircEUlar is a European-funded project, and Europe invests a high amount of money to increase knowledge, but also to reach as many people as possible to build a more sustainable future. So what could be further initiatives between art and science for supporting this aim and for reaching also people, as we discussed, that might not already be informed about climate change and the urgent need for action?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important question, actually, and good question. My intuitive answer would actually be that we should be focusing, when we're looking at art and science projects, maybe at projects that are already more participatory from the beginning, like from the art sides also. Yeah? So basically projects that involve different audiences right from the beginning and not only in the kind of presentation moment. There are artists who work with different groups of people, and they could be already involved, or their way of working would be to actually include the audiences already earlier on. And usually my experience is that when audiences are involved in the production of an artwork, or even just brought into the conversation early on, they are naturally more engaged with the topic. Yeah? That's also probably a human, of course, response. Yeah? If I'm part of something, I feel it's more important. Another option I see is to create presentations or exhibitions that combine both artistic and scientific elements that are intentionally designed for specific audience groups, as I said. So they have specific mediation services for specific groups. For example, also maybe the project components are going to schools. Yeah? So we are not only an exhibition in a museum, but we are creating really, like I mentioned already in the museum world, we call this the outreach projects, or maybe pop-up shows. Yes, there are beautiful projects where actually museums are leasing trucks, and in the trucks they have small exhibitions, and then they're going to different neighborhoods and they're just opening up the backside of the truck, and people can enter there and see the shows, and they don't have this kind of, the projects are more welcoming in the sense that you're also not having the challenge that people need to dare to enter a museum, because that's a reality we face in the context of art. Yeah, that not everyone, like, who feels welcome in a museum and who dares to go in there, who knows that the content there is for them. So I think this kind of like looking more at participatory aspects of projects, and also outreach projects where we find different formats which really maybe goes to the people rather than asking them to come to you, might be a possibility. And maybe I'm just adding one thing, which I was now just thinking about the question you asked me before, about what actually art and science projects can do, or the success would be. And what that's really a very personal perspective, but my experience was when I was starting now this project, is that when I first read these research papers, I was personally intimidated. Yes, I felt it was super complex. I was not sure if I was clever enough to understand what it was about, because the language was completely different. But what happened during these conversations and when the artists came in, basically, is that they changed this kind of very complex and maybe dense feeling around the research into something open. Yeah, so they just asked questions. They came in with the curiosity. They picked out little details of the project and made the whole topic also more approachable for myself. And I think that this also works then for an audience. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nora. Just as you said about engaging citizens, people from the very beginning, actually we in T6, we are involved currently in a project that is trying to do exactly this. The project is called Part Art for OW, and which stands for Participatory Art for Society Engagement with Ocean and Water. And we did a podcast about this, which is the episode before this one. And we invite listeners who are more interested to explore this. And also you, Nora, we invite you to listen to that, because it's a project which is working on the protection of oceans through citizen science initiatives and art projects. So
great.
A very, very particular project with exactly doing what you just described.
Nice.
We slowly come to an end. So times are changing, and so is the climate. As we both observed when we started this conversation, is that we just have experienced, according to the European Union's Earth Observation Program, Copernicus, the hottest June in Western Europe ever measured. So climate change is again present in all our minds, at least to those people who experience this extreme heat. What do you think the collaboration between art and science on climate-related topics will look like in 10 years' time from now? Or what do you wish it would be? Considering also that this summer might be the coolest for the future. So let's think also a little bit in these terms, looking at the future.
Okay, so I see you left the easy question to the end. But okay, I'll try my best to answer it. So if I think about how the world might look like in 10 years, I need to say that it's a bit pessimistic maybe, but I imagine in general that the situation will become more intense. Yeah, so we'll likely face greater risks, more climate-related catastrophes, and as a result, emotions like fear, overwhelm, and sadness may grow stronger. But at the same time, like aside of this kind of pessimistic view I'm having at the moment, I also believe in the human resilience, and in the desire to change and make things better. So in terms of art and science collaborations, I think, or I hope, I wish, that we'll see more of them happening, because I think that we will, over the time, and that's what we are starting to understand already now and since some years, that it's important that we work together, basically from this, like all sorts of disciplines, that we cannot function anymore as a singularity, but that we need this kind of multi-perspective approach. And in that sense, I'd really like to see more interdisciplinary projects taking place, with art being involved earlier on. So as I said, also with this participatory thing, that I would imagine that there are much more basically research groups where artists are also involved as entity in a way, or as position from the beginning on. And I mean, I believe, as I said already, art is communication. And if we imagine that science should be communicating and contextualizing its research, and also should reach out to audiences or to wider audiences, then I believe that artists should be included therefore at the beginning of this process, basically. And working together on different angles of how to find solutions or better situations, basically.
Thanks, Nora, a lot for the insights and also for the time. We hope that this is also interesting for our listeners, the reflection that we did about this specific experience they had with CircEUlar, but also the reflection about the collaboration between arts and science in general. So we hope, or I personally hope, to collaborate with you again in another exciting project, perhaps in one that you just mentioned, where we involve arts from the very beginning. And thank you very much for your time.
That's it for this episode of Ecosystem Exchange. If this has sparked your curiosity, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Follow T6 Ecosystems for updates on upcoming topics, guests, and exclusive insights. You can also visit our website to learn more about the research projects shaping our world today. Thank you for joining the exchange. See you in the next episode.